It was a Saturday afternoon. I looked at Bruno with anticipation. "Have you seen David today, Bruno?" He looked back at me with a confused grunt. I pat him on the head and proceeded to call out to David. "Come on, David, we're burning daylight." He gave me a sarcastic yet cheerful reply. "Oh yeah, I definitely want to go look at some haunted warehouse today." I could feel the grin on his face and him rolling his eyes as I packed mine and Bruno's things. A few minutes passed and we were prepared for our trip. I start to head out the door as I'm stopped in my tracks. This tingling sensation crawls down my spine. I had a feeling that we shouldn't be leaving the sanctuary of home. I quickly snapped back to reality when I heard the distant voice of David yelling out to me. "Come on, Slowpoke, I thought you were eager to leave." I shook my thoughts off like salt over a shoulder. Finally, we embarked on our journey. See, we heard of an old abandoned warehouse on 17th Street. However, we weren't too sure if it was completely safe there or not. As we arrived at the site, Bruno started barking and growling wildly, as if crazed by the mere sight of this place. "Easy, Bruno, easy," I said as I tried to calm him down. He slowly drifted into an uneasy anxiousness the closer that we got to the building, as if he sensed something me and David could not. Nervousness from Bruno's outbursts aside, me and David grabbed our things and headed to the main entrance. The warehouse exterior could best be described as a plethora of broken glass, mildew, and old faded off-white paint. Broken windows, simple geometry, and a color that can only give mystery and disturbance was all that remained of this worn-down structure. I started to realize that perhaps Bruno had the right idea. There was something wrong with this place. I could feel it in my gut. David could sense my nervousness and hesitantly asked me, "You okay, Isaac?" "I don't know. Something feels wrong about this place." "How do you mean wrong?" he asked me. "I don't know, man. It just doesn't feel right. Can't you sense it?" I said. David shot me a worried look, as if I was going crazy or something. "Are you off your meds again?" he sarcastically asked, trying to nudge a laugh out of me. I replied with a stern tone in my voice. "Fine, you think I'm crazy? Whatever. Let's just go on in." Alright, it's just a joke, man." "Whatever, man," I snarled at him. We looked for an opening and realized that we were likely going to have to climb in through a broken window. Luckily, we packed a couple of extra t-shirts, so I had an idea. "Hey, toss me one of those t-shirts, David." "What for?" David asked. "I'm going to protect us from the glass, you idiot." I wrapped the plain white t-shirt around the broken window pane and we climbed inside. We were struck in awe by what we saw next, as Bruno courageously hopped through the broken window behind us. The inside of the warehouse was completely maintained. There was no sign of damage or deterioration that could be found plastered all over the outside of the same exact building. It made absolutely no sense. I certainly couldn't make sense of it myself, even if I tried. Who could have possibly been maintaining this entire building? I asked myself. Certainly there couldn't be anybody in here, right? Little did I know, I would later choke on these very words. As if the condition of the building wasn't surprising enough, We were startled from the sound of the industrial overhead lights flickering on and off. There's power here? How's that even possible? David chuckled and said, "At least we don't have to waste the batteries of our flashlights." "This is serious, David. What the hell's going on here?" "Look, man, maybe it's just a power surge or something. I'm sure it's fine." This explanation neither made sense nor satisfied any of my concerns. "Let's keep going, I guess," I grunted under my breath. The click of a light and running footsteps soon ensued. We started running from it, not knowing what to do. Then our run turned into a straight-on sprint as the sound of the footsteps got closer and closer. We were suddenly halted when we run into an old security guard with a flashlight. We also realized the running behind us stopped, and the sound was replaced merely by his voice. "Hey, you shouldn't be here. Who are you? Why are you even here?" "Hey, sorry man, we didn't know anybody owned the place."
"It isn't owned by anybody," he said.
"What do you mean it isn't owned by anybody?" "Not in the conventional sense, anyway," he replied. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Never mind that. You guys really shouldn't be snooping around in here." His voice was old and raspy, as if just speaking was a strain to him. His words spelled out infinite wisdom, and yet also atrophy, without him even attempting to sound as such. He turned around and walked away, round a corner of boxes. We tried to call after him and followed him around the same corner. "Hey!" we called out. He was gone, as if he was never even there. He didn't so much as exude even a silent footstep. He simply vanished. In this moment, fear and confusion struck our hearts, as Bruno started to growl and bark again as he did earlier. Suddenly, every one of the lights that were on before, if you believed it, ceased to even exist. We were suddenly surrounded by corners of nothingness, a box of an open void. It felt as if we were being watched, and yet there was nothing to be seen, nowhere to hide. We couldn't shake this feeling. An ominous strain was pulling at our minds, tugging on our restless insecurities. No, things only took a turn for the worst. Just as quickly as everything inside disappeared, it reappeared again, like a flash. And this time, we were illuminated by a red-crimson glow of the overhead lights. The ground trembled, and we shook uncontrollably. Bruno no longer barked, and instead whined in a scared tone. This allowed me to know that we were all on the same page now, full of worry and fear. We weren't sure what would happen next. We did know, however, that it wouldn't be pleasant. Bruno turned backwards and started running. It didn't take long for me and David to start following him. Just as the security guard, Bruno turned around a corner and vanished into thin air. I panicked. I didn't know what to do next. The ground stopped shaking and the lights turned back into a normal yellow glare. That was definitely the last straw for me. I now started to soak in my surroundings and suggested David to do the same. "That's it. I'm finding Bruno and we're getting the hell out of here, David." David looked at me with a slight hesitation. We started to make our way through this maze of company boxes. They all read the same thing. Fragile. That's it. No other warnings, no explanations, just fragile. But what made this product so fragile? Why was it turned inside out from the world? These thoughts raced through my mind as we stepped over further into this conglomeration of cardboard boxes. A moment later, we spot a section of boxes moving, as if something was rustling through them. "Hello?" I muttered out. "Wait," David said. "You don't know what's over there. It could be a trap for all we know." "You're right," I said. Instinct took over as I nudged David to peel another t-shirt out of the travel bag we had this whole time. I balled the t-shirt up and threw it at the pile of moving boxes to see if I would get a reaction. Lo and behold, the boxes stopped moving. "Now what?" David asked, reluctantly. "I don't know. That's the best idea I had." Shockingly, the boxes now started to visibly fade away, as if deleted by some unknown force. "That's not possible," I said to myself. David quietly mutters, "I saw it too." We inched slowly towards the empty space that now took up where the boxes seemed to be before. We approached it, and it now revealed that there was a flight of downward stairs. "I'm willing to bet that's where Bruno's gonna be," I said, trying to sound brave, covering my shrill breaths and hesitative tone in my voice. David seemingly tried to do the same. Replies, "Yeah, you're probably right, man." I can almost feel the tremble and hesitation in his voice as he quivered out his own words. We descended the flight of stairs. It seemed to stretch for an impossible amount of distance and depth. It felt as if we were descending to hell itself, and at this point, for all we knew, it was. I thought of this as we went further and further into the depths of what I'll now refer to as the chasm. Finally, we reached the door. It looked very much out of place. The current year was 2016, but this door, it seemed to be some kind of Victorian era door in the United States. Nothing in this place made any sense. I felt I was slowly losing my sanity, as did David. "What will we find beyond that door, Isaac?" He asked as if I knew anything about this abyssal building of mysteries. "I don't know, and that frightens me almost as much as..." My sentence was abruptly cut short as we could hear the frightening loud bark and howl of Bruno. I knew it was him. I've heard him for all of my life. "Isaac, wait!" David exclaimed as I started to grab the door handle. I grasped it as I said, "That's Bruno. I know it is." "Just hold on for a second, man. How do you know it's not a trap? Come on, you've seen how things are in here." "I'm sorry, David. I've got to take that chance. It's my dog, man. Are you with me or not?" David sighed and said, "You better not let us die, man." God, I wish I'd just listened to him. It was indeed a trap perfectly laid out for me. I just didn't know it yet. I rushed to the door and darted to the sound of my dog howling in agony and pain. Never mind the fact that I didn't know what or where I was running through or to. The fact I didn't even realize David was already gone. I grew closer and closer to the sound of Bruno's call for help. I arrived to a boiler room filled with elongated pipes and steam coming from all directions. I had done it. I found Bruno, and yet I hadn't. What lay before me was a pile of bones that seemed to be the size and shape of Bruno. No, it can't be. But how? I thought to myself. Even if he did get killed or hurt, there's no way his body would be in this state of decay already. Once again, this chasm perplexes me with another riddle that makes no sense. Upon further inspection of the corpse, I found Bruno's collar, assuring me my worst fear had come true. My dog, my childhood friend, was dead. There was a furnace nearby. I sadly lifted his bones into my arms as best as I could carry them by myself and headed towards the fire. I said a few words, hoping he could hear me. With tears streaming down my face, I tossed his remains into the fire. Now all I could feel was despair and rage. I would find out who did this, who was behind all of this. I would have my revenge. That's when it hit me. Where's David? The hairs on the back of my neck rose up, and I recalled the sickening dread I felt back at home. "David!" I yelled out. No response. I never felt so alone and scared in all of my life. What was going on here? Why was all of this happening to me? To us? I was reluctant to move forward, or any direction for that matter. I hesitantly creeped around the next corner as I swear I heard footsteps. And it was footsteps, but not those of David. 3 shadowy figures in hooded robes walked by the next corridor, not even giving my direction a glance. And yet, it felt as if they knew I was here. I could feel their evil presence in my mind, like an unwelcome memory. It burned me to my core. This heightened my survival instinct, and I immediately ran the opposite way, hoping they wouldn't have heard me. They did hear me, and not just then, but when I first gazed upon them. They heard my shallow breaths, my heartbeat, my ever so slight movement. They knew just as I suspected they did, yet they didn't come after me. I knew all of this because they entered my mind and somehow telepathically spoke to me. They told me to stop where I was, to no longer intrude. I didn't know what to do. I was frozen in place. How would I even respond? If they can take control of my mind, I'm sure they would have no problems catching up to me. Nothing surprises me anymore. I couldn't escape. I couldn't resist them. I kneeled down, defeated. I closed my eyes, thinking back to when me and David and Bruno would just go out to the park and have a good time. I'd throw Bruno to frisbee. David would sit back with his Mountain Dews and laugh. All of that was gone now. I felt hopeless and alone. When I opened my eyes, I expected to accept my deadly fate by the hands of those figures. But instead, I was welcomed by the warm stench of my dog's breath. "Bruno?" I exclaimed loudly and happily. I was so gleeful to see my dog was alive and well. I immediately hugged him. "But how?" I said to him. Bruno just barked at me in a happy way, as if everything was alright. But in fact, truly wasn't. We still didn't know what happened to David. I stood up, a slight bit less dreadful than before. Now, I had one more mission. I was eager to find David and get the hell out of here. I started to carefully check the corridors and quietly whispering, "David, psst, David," but to no avail. Me and Bruno searched the chasm of steam and suppressed fear for what seemed like hours on end, with no sign of either David or the hooded figures. We began to lose hope again when suddenly I hear David's raspy voice from a distant corner.
"Isaac, is that you?"
"David?" I exclaimed once more. How is that you? What are you doing over here?" I approached my best friend with caution as I noticed he had changed. He was no longer the David I originally left the house with today. He appeared to have aged for what must have been a couple of decades at least, from what I can tell. How?
"Isaac, come closer,"
David muttered to me. I kneeled down in front of my friend with tears in my eyes. "David,
"Isaac, listen to me. You need to take Bruno and get out of here. It's not safe."
"But David, I can't leave you here."
"Isaac, please don't argue with me. They'll be back soon. Who knows what else they'll have in store for us if they have you."
"What happened to you, David?"
"I've been down here for 22 years, Isaac."
"It's not possible. I just lost you hours ago," I argued with him.
"You and I both know that's not how things work down here. Isaac, just listen to me. You've got to go. Save yourselves. You must not let anybody know of this place. You don't know what those figures are capable of."
"David, I can't just leave you here."
"You have to,"
David said, as he lifted up his shirt and exposed what appeared to be a 6-inch deep gash in the shape of no claw I've ever seen equipped on an animal before. Blood spewed from his wound and seeped into the cracks in the concrete floor. Holding back my tears, I gave David a huge hug and nodded at him. "Come on, Bruno," I said. Bruno approached David and gave him a lick to the face, as if saying goodbye the best way he could, and whimpered as he walked away. "Goodbye, my friend. I'll never forget you," I said as I waved him goodbye and rounded the next corner. I knew what I had to do next. Even if it was the last thing I did, I had to get revenge for David. Those hooded figures would know what I'm capable of when this was over. I headed straight for the boiler room, retracing my dusty footprints from before. I knew I had fuel in the travel bag. Then I knew exactly what I needed to do. As I approached the boiler room, I noticed there was an old barrel of oil in the corner. Everything lined up perfectly at that moment. I pulled out a matchbox and match out of the travel bag and struck it. Between my fingers was the flame that stood before me in oblivion. The hooded figures once more entered my mind.
"What are you doing?" You must never leave.
Oh yeah? I said. Watch me. Just then I dropped the flame, and me and Bruno bolted for the door that lay just a few corridors away from us, just as it had earlier. A huge explosion erupted, and I knew me and Bruno didn't have much time to get out of there. I could only hope that the explosion took out the hooded figures as well. Me and Bruno ran as fast as physically possible up that last flight of stairs, the explosion not far behind us. When we reached the top of the stairs, there was once more nothing in the building. That all too familiar square void was back. I tried to pay it no mind as me and Bruno ran for our lives, but I couldn't. The entirety of the contents that inhabited the building when we descended before started to flicker in and out of existence, like some kind of real-life lag spike. It was so unreal, and yet stared me right in the face. The lights, boxes, equipment, everything just in and out, some kind of twisted hologram. Me and Bruno finally made it to the broken window from before. The explosion caught up to us as it set the entire warehouse aflame. We were knocked back as we exited about 20 feet. It was unlike anything I ever experienced in my life. The warehouse tore apart even more so than it was already worn down. Panels fell off. Glass windows shattered under the immense heat and pressure of the gigantic fire. We did it. We won, I thought to myself as I stared down at Bruno with a hopeful smile. Bruno looked back at me, wagging his tail and barking happily at me. At long last, me and Bruno headed to my car. When I got in the car, pure dread and sadness hit me as I thought of my other best friend who didn't make it out. David. I burst into tears as I recalled cherished memories of me and David spending countless hours together throughout our lives. He wasn't just my roommate, he was my best friend, and now he was gone. I pulled myself together and started the car. We finally pulled into my driveway after hours of terror and mystery and true horror. I laid Bruno down to sleep beside me in bed and attempted to go to sleep. It would be hours before I could achieve this. Nobody would be able to sleep well after a night I just went through. If you did, you'd have to be a damn madman, very experienced in strange happenings. I was neither of those things. After 4 long hours of tossing, turning, and crying until I couldn't anymore, I finally fell asleep. It was 5 a.m., and I was suddenly awoken by a daunting feeling once more crawling its way up my spine. I quickly looked around the room, but nobody was there. Then, in the darkness, a voice called within my head. I actually knew this voice. It said, "Come back." It was David.